The apartment I shared with Kyoto had always been calm. We weren't the best of friends, but we had lived together for 2 years without any major issues. He was reserved and quiet, preferring solitude over social gatherings. Though we rarely shared personal details, we could get along fine. It was one of those roommate situations where you don't need to be close, but respect and understanding of each other's space were key. But something about Kyoto began to change over time, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. At first, it was subtle, a shift in his mood, a faint restlessness that seemed to grow slowly. I noticed it during our late-night conversations, the ones where we'd sit on opposite sides of the couch, sipping our drinks and discussing anything from politics to movies. Kyoto was intelligent, always reading and researching topics that piqued his interest. He'd often spend hours at his computer, typing away or reading about politics, movies, or even philosophy. It was clear that his mind was always racing, always searching for new answers. But to me, he never struck me as odd. Sure, he was a little antisocial, but who isn't sometimes? We would engage in long debates about the flaws in society or the evils of modern politics. But they always felt like the kind of discussions people have after a few beers, casual, intellectual conversation. He was fascinated by anarchism, chaos, and the inherent corruption of society. It wasn't unusual for him to express disdain for government control, for societal norms, and for the conformity that seemed to dictate people's lives. He was a deep thinker, and though I didn't always agree with him, I respected his convictions. But over time, his fixation on these topics became more intense. It was as though he couldn't talk about anything else. We used to discuss these things casually, but now Kyoto seemed obsessed. He would sit for hours, poring over books and articles, taking notes in a fevered frenzy. I could hear him muttering to himself late at night, as if working out some grand revelation. It felt like his intellectual curiosity was beginning to morph into something darker. One day, something started to change. Kyoto began bringing up the Joker, but not in the way people typically refer to him in casual conversation. Kyoto wasn't talking about the latest film adaptation or a funny comic strip. He started talking about the Joker as though he were more than just a character. He spoke about him as a symbol of freedom, of chaos, of defiance against a broken society. It seemed like Kyoto had found something deeper in the Joker, something that resonated with his growing discontent. At first, I thought it was just a passing obsession, something like when someone becomes fixated on a movie or a character after seeing it. But as days passed, his admiration for the Joker only seemed to intensify. It wasn't just the constant references to the Joker that began to worry me. It was his actions. Kyoto started dressing in strange clothes, purple suits, green shirts. It was as if he was wearing a costume, but not for Halloween. He looked like he was trying to become the Joker, like he was stepping into a character he truly believed in. I remember the first time I saw him fully dressed in his Joker attire, standing in the living room with his wild grin. I laughed at first, thinking it was a joke, but as the weeks went by and he continued to dress like this more frequently, more seriously, I couldn't brush it off anymore. Something wasn't right. I became more observant. Kyoto started isolating himself in his room, only emerging to eat or briefly chat. When he did talk, his smile was unsettling, too wide, too forced. It was as though he was putting on a mask, hiding behind a facade. I found myself questioning whether the Kyoto I had known was still there. He was different now, more erratic, more unpredictable. And that smile, that damn smile, was always there. I tried to dismiss it at first. Maybe I was overthinking things, looking for problems where there were none. But then one evening, I noticed something that sent a chill down my spine. I had been sitting in the living room when Kyoto left his computer and attended. I don't know why, but I felt compelled to look through his files. Maybe it was because I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. When I opened his browser history, my suspicions were confirmed. The searches were all centered around the Joker questions about how to become truly free, how to manipulate people, how to spread chaos without leaving a trace. There were even searches about the death penalty in Japan, specifics about how one could be sentenced to death. My heart raced as I read through these pages. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It wasn't just idle curiosity or some academic exploration. Kyoto was obsessed, consumed by these dark ideas. As I dug deeper into his files, I found an email he had written. It was scheduled to be sent in a few hours. It was a detailed message, and although he didn't mention any names, the context made it clear. He was planning something. The email spoke about taking the first step towards something bigger, something he believed would immortalize him. He didn't go into specifics, but it was clear enough. He was planning to kill someone. The calmness with which he described it sent a wave of nausea through me. It was as though he was talking about a mundane task, something as trivial as going grocery shopping. I couldn't just stand by and ignore this. I had to do something, but I wasn't sure what. I confronted him the next day. It wasn't the conversation I expected. Kyoto wasn't reacting like a normal person anymore. He looked at me with that damn grin, that smile that didn't reach his eyes, and said, "It's the society that's sick. I'm just freeing myself from its chains." His words sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't just a philosophical rant anymore. He believed it. He truly believed that the world needed to be torn apart. I didn't know what to do. He was beyond reasoning, beyond help. I decided to follow him, to see what he was really planning. I had to know how far he was willing to go. That night, as he prepared to leave, I hid in the living room and watched from the crack in the door. He had no idea I was trailing him. He left the apartment, wearing the Joker costume again. I followed him, keeping a safe distance. My heart was pounding in my chest as I watched him walk down the street, heading toward the subway. There was a purpose in his steps, a sense that he knew exactly what he was doing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this was going to end badly. Kyoto walked toward a secluded side entrance to the subway, one that wasn't used often. It was deserted, not a soul in sight. I knew this was my chance to confront him. I approached cautiously, but he was already aware of me. He turned, his crooked smile spreading across his face. "I know you're following me," he said. "You have no idea how far I'll go. You're about to witness something wonderful." He stepped closer, and I could feel the air thicken with tension. The darkness around us seemed to press in, as if the very night itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I could barely bring myself to speak, but I asked the question that had been burning in my mind. "What are you planning, Kyoto?" His smile widened even further. "You'll see soon enough," he replied, his voice almost a whisper now, filled with an eerie certainty. I took a step back, unsure of what to do. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get as far away from him as possible. But I couldn't leave, not when I knew what he was capable of. I tried to call the police, but before I could pull out my phone, he lunged forward, grabbing my arm with an iron grip. His eyes were wild, unrecognizable, filled with madness. "You won't stop me," he hissed. "I've already made up my mind." I struggled against him, adrenaline flooding my system. In that moment, I realized just how deep his obsession ran, how far gone he truly was. The man I had shared an apartment with for 2 years was no longer there. He had become something else entirely, something darker, something that could never go back to normal. "You're not yourself anymore," I said, my voice trembling. Kyoto's laugh was low and chilling. "No, I'm more myself than ever," he replied, his grip tightening. "I'm free." I managed to break free from his hold, running in the opposite direction. My heart was racing, and my thoughts were a blur of panic and fear. I didn't know what he was capable of, but I had to stop him before it was too late. As I fled, I heard him laughing behind me, a cruel, triumphant sound that echoed through the empty streets. And in that moment, I knew that the world I had known with Kyoto had ended forever. What had started as a strange obsession had grown into something monstrous. He was no longer just a man. He was the embodiment of chaos, a living, breathing nightmare. I had no idea where he was headed, but I couldn't let him go alone. For a minute, I didn't know what he was talking about, but his voice made my skin crawl. There was something in the tone, something different, something that wasn't Kyoto. He sounded hollow, detached, like a stranger wearing the same skin. I had known Kyoto for years. We'd been friends since high school, laughing at the same jokes, sharing the same dreams of one day escaping this dull city. But now, this wasn't the Kyoto I had known. This was someone else, someone dangerous. His words, cold and calculated, sent a shiver down my spine. This wasn't just an ordinary conversation, this was something much darker. I tried to talk to him, tried to reason with him, but his mind was already made up. "What you're doing is crazy," I said, my voice cracking with fear and disbelief. "You need help." But his response was chilling, like he wasn't even hearing me. "The world is sick, and I'm the cure." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of his conviction. It felt like a slap to my face. What was I supposed to do? I knew this wasn't just a phase. This was the real Kyoto. Or at least, the Kyoto he had become. He wasn't listening. He wasn't hearing me. And before I could react, he hit me. The force of the blow took me by surprise. It wasn't a random punch. It was deliberate, filled with purpose. He was enjoying it. I could see it in his eyes, the way they glinted with something dark and twisted. I fell to the ground, stunned, as he stood over me. His laughter was unsettling, almost maniacal. It echoed in my ears, filling the empty space around us like a mocking sound that refused to fade. He kicked me again, this time slower, as if savoring the moment, watching my pain, listening to my gasps. His smile widened with every breathless sound I made. It wasn't just cruelty, it was enjoyment, pleasure. I could see it in the way he moved, the way he reveled in my suffering. Every part of me screamed to fight back, to do anything to stop him. But my body betrayed me. My muscles were weak, my vision blurred with the blood rushing to my head, and my thoughts scattered. I tried to gather my strength, but it was no use. He knocked me down again, leaving me dizzy, disoriented, struggling to remember where I was. The taste of blood filled my mouth, the metallic flavor lingering on my tongue as I tried to get back on my feet. My legs trembled beneath me, but I pushed through the pain, determined not to let him see me weak. I couldn't let him win. That's when I heard his voice again. "I don't plan to kill you. Calm down. You can't be the first victim. It has to be something ironic." His words didn't make sense, but I understood one thing. This wasn't just about killing. This was about sending a message. Kyoto had become the Joker, his idol, his role model, and he was determined to show the world that he was right, that the chaos he was creating was justified, that it was the only truth in a world that had become too comfortable, too predictable. I stared up at him, my heart pounding in my chest as the weight of his words began to sink in. He wasn't a person anymore, he was an idea, a concept, a virus, spreading its madness to anyone who would listen. And nothing would stop him. Not even me. I was still lying on the ground, struggling to catch my breath when he turned and began walking toward the subway. His laughter echoed in the empty tunnel, reverberating off the walls and bouncing back to me in waves, like it was taunting me, reminding me of how powerless I felt. Helpless. I tried to get up, but the pain in my body was too much. I stumbled, trying to push myself to my feet, but my legs gave out beneath me. I fell again, my hands scraping the concrete, my fingers clutching the cold surface for support. The subway doors were already closing, and I could see Kyoto's silhouette through the glass, walking further and further away. His laughter continued, mocking me as the doors shut, sealing him inside. It was too late. I couldn't reach him in time. The next morning, the news reports confirmed my worst fear. Kyoto had gone on a rampage, stabbing several people in the subway. The headlines flashed across the screen, each one more horrifying than the last. Luckily, no one had died, but it didn't matter. Kyoto had gotten what he wanted. He had made his mark. His name would be remembered. He was arrested soon after, but by then, it didn't matter. The headlines dubbed him the Tokyo Joker. It was exactly what he had been after fame, notoriety, a legacy. The Joker, a name that was now synonymous with chaos, destruction, and madness. Kyoto had become the embodiment of everything he had once admired. The worst part? He had wanted to die for his cause. He had wanted to be remembered, to be immortalized in history. But instead, he was sentenced to 24 years in prison. It was the ultimate irony. He had failed, but in his mind, he was still a hero, a martyr for his cause. And as for me, I was left with a nagging question that I couldn't shake. Could I have stopped him before it got this far? Could I have done something to help him, to get him help before he crossed the line? Or had I been too late, too blind to see the signs? The guilt consumed me. It gnawed at my insides, like a wound that wouldn't heal, a scar that wouldn't fade. Paulado never imagined that he would find himself in the middle of a tragedy that no one could understand. His brother, Grant, had always been a bit distant, always the odd one out in the family. While Paul and his older brother Cody seemed to live ordinary, uneventful lives, Grant had a tendency to keep to himself, to think in ways that others didn't. He wasn't necessarily a troublemaker, but there was always something about him that made others uncomfortable. Something that didn't quite fit, but that had always been okay with Paul. Everyone has their quirks, right? It wasn't a big deal. After all, family is family. But that all changed the night of the school dance. Grant had gone missing, completely disappeared without a trace. The police were called. Everyone searched, but there was no sign of him. No ransom note, no demands. Just a complete void where Grant had once been. Paul kept his mind focused on the search, thinking it was just a stupid prank. Grant had always been a bit of a mystery, but he wouldn't just disappear. Not like this. Not without saying something. Days turned into weeks, and the search only grew more desperate. Paul couldn't understand how his brother had simply vanished. He kept replaying the events in his mind. The dance, Grant leaving to go to the bathroom, and never coming back. But as much as he tried to understand, he couldn't. It wasn't like Grant to just leave. He would have told someone. At least, that's what Paul thought. Then, one night, nearly a month after his disappearance, there was a break in the case. Grant's body was found. It was as if the earth had swallowed him up and then given him back. The police didn't know how he had died, but there were rumors of strange marks on his body, like someone had been experimenting with him. The official cause of death was listed as strangulation, but it didn't make sense. Paul couldn't wrap his mind around it. His brother, someone he had grown up with, someone he had shared his life with, was now gone, and all that was left was a body that seemed so distant, so foreign. And that was when Paul started to piece it all together. Grant had been obsessed with the Joker. He had always been fascinated with the idea of chaos, of tearing down the walls of the world, just like Kyoto had. Paul had never realized just how deep that obsession went. Grant had been researching how to become more like him, how to embody his spirit. Paul had no idea how it all connected, but the dots were becoming clearer. Grant had always admired the idea of freedom, of living outside the rules. The Joker had been his hero, his inspiration. But somewhere along the way, he had crossed the line. And now, Paul realized, he had paid the ultimate price. The Joker had claimed another victim. The silence in Paul's mind was deafening, and he realized, far too late, that his brother had already fallen down the same dangerous path that Kyoto had. It was too late to save him, too late to stop the madness. But the guilt? That would linger forever.